Hey folks, this is Sung speaking here, and I'm going to give a demo of SQLMesh's column level lineage that you can use for free starting today, and also just a lightning round of demos for just very specific features of SQLMesh that I found very meaningful, and I hope are meaningful for you and the problems that you care about. But taking a step back, the problems I'm solving for are really around whenever I or the data engineers I work with are evolving their data pipelines, they typically have a nagging question in the back of their head is like, how does all the SQL glue together? And in plainer terms, column level lineage, right? Like I want to know how the sausage is made. And what's really cool about SQLMesh is that it gives it to you for free. And so right now I have a open source example project downloaded to my local computer. And I'm just going to open that up. It's going to take me to the SQLMesh UI, and it's going to give me this pane over here. But let's roleplay a scenario a bit. Like, let's say, hey, I am a data engineer tasked with updating the customer's SQL model in order to update the customer lifetime value calculation, right? But before I do that, I need to know how it's created in the first place. And instead of squinting my eyes and trying to reason through all the SQL, I just want column level lineage to just kind of surface the answer for me. And so from there, it gets to do just that. And so when I click onto this, I'm going to zoom in over here and click on customer lifetime value. Bam, it just gives me the column level lineage I want, and also shows me how it's relevant in the context of CTEs versus just doing a straight up reference, right? And you know what's even cooler is, like, let's say this is the first time I'm doing this. I'm like, hey, how do I know that this column level lineage is doing what I want, right? I don't want to have to second guess it each time I do this and validate this myself. That's where you don't have to. Or I just click on that little eye icon and it shows me exactly where it's flowing in through, right? And so over here, it even highlights the subsection within the subsection of the SQL that it's surfacing. And so this just gives me that extra bit of confidence that this column level lineage parsing is doing exactly like what I want. And from there, I just get to be a lot more surgical of where I am, adjusting this throughout my actual SQL over here. And I think what's so cool about this is something that when I was a data engineer, I was screaming for to be just a really ergonomic and normal experience. When I worked at DBT Labs and Dataful, people are screaming at me to make this a really delightful and ergonomic experience. And I think what's so great is it's free now. And I'm excited for how this is going to raise the floor for people's just kind of user experience when updating their data pipelines going forward. And I hope that means something to you. Now here's the fun part for the lightning round demos. And so bear with me here. I'm gonna dash around a little bit here. But what's really cool to me is a problem that SQLMesh solves for is, let's say I add a column to a SQL model that looks like this. And let's say, hey, I just want to add a non-breaking change where literally all I want to do is just add this column, and that's it. I don't want to update anything downstream of it. I just want to add this column because it's needed just for this SQL model. That's it. It's independent of any other things that I care about changing. Now, in the before times, without SQLMesh, you would just have to run everything downstream of this regardless, because whatever SQL engine you're using, whether it be DBT or you're templatizing kind of like SQL calls or using stored procedures, you're just gonna have to bear with it of like, I just have to rerun everything downstream of this. But what's so cool about SQLMesh to me is that when I run a command like this, very similar to like the kind of UX that you get with Terraform, what's really cool about this is it'll say, hey Sung, you're adding a new column, just to let you know it's indirect non-breaking for this model over here, which means, hey, we're not actually gonna touch anything there because it's not actually selecting from it, right? We get to just update this incremental model in place. And from there, I'm just going to generically backfill from history because this is just example data that's pretty small. And then after I backfill it, it's going to recreate that physical table, which makes sense because I'm adding a new column for that, right? It's going to evaluate and just make sure that it's working as expected, and it's just going to update my virtual data environment with that. Now, the next thing I think about is like, hey, what does it look like to promote to prod? Do I have to do a bunch of backfills and go through all these mechanics again? Or like, is there any gotchas with there? No, not at all. That's where when I want to promote this to production, I just run the command that looks like that. Bam. It just says, hey, do you just want to run a virtual update? Because I've already, backfilled this, right? I click yes. And Shazam, there we go. That's it. And I think what's so powerful about this is, and mind you, this is a pretty simple toy example, but what's so powerful about this is, let's say there were like 20 downstream SQL models from this. I would tear up my hair if I had to run all 20 of those things downstream just because I added a new column. I don't want to live in that reality anymore, and I hope you don't have to either. Now, here's the other fun part, where I loved writing Jinja macros in the past when I used to work at DBT Labs. And it's just one of those things, like, you don't know what you don't know until I encountered that you could write really powerful macros using Python and using SQLglot, which powers SQLMesh under the hood. Man, essentially the problem this solves for is, like, it just provides a much better programmatic interface to even make sure that it's constructing the SQL you want in the first place. And in this very specific example, all I'm really doing is creating a surrogate key. And so what I mean by that is, let's say, there isn't a proper primary key as part of a SQL model that you're developing, and you're wondering, like, hey, like, I need to generate an artificial one that serves as that kind of like canonical primary key, right? That's where you can just use a macro that looks like this, insert the columns you care about, and it'll generate that SQL for you. And what's really cool about this is agnostic to any query engine that you run this against. And so if right now I'm using BigQuery behind the scenes, if I use Snowflake or Redshift or Databricks, this should work in place without having to change any of this. Versus if I'm using something like Jinja, I always have to tweak it a little bit or add a bunch of conditionals in order to pivot the string construction. But here it's just, I get to move on with my life, right? And now I'm thinking to myself, like, hey, exactly what does this look like when I render the SQL? So over here, what it'll do is it'll take that macro, it'll run it through this Python code, and it'll construct this. But now I'm thinking to myself, like, hey, Sung, like, you wrote this, like, how do you test this? Like you would with any other Python function, if you're a data engineer, is you unit test it using something like PyTest. And so right now I run PyTest, bam, it's exactly what I expect. And given I'm in the context of BigQuery, I just want to make extra sure that it's doing what I want, and that's it. And what's so cool about this is, as I'm updating this macro, I can always update these tests to make sure it's doing exactly what I want as I evolve my data platform, right? And so that's a quick lightning round, but all in all, this kind of mosaic of things I wanted to show you is just the start. I am ecstatic to show you how this is going to solve so many problems that are just so tedious, so painful, and so boring in how you work, and just melt those away so that you just wonder, I can't believe I ever worked like that before. Because I know that's what I think now. And I just want you to feel how I feel. So yeah, that's it. Peace, y'all.